Um, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, and we are delighted to have Paul Koscheka, who is the FAST team manager for the Sacramento FSDO. And I won't go further than that, except to pass the baton to Paul and allow him to give whatever introduction he wishes to about himself and his topic. And he'll be sharing his screen for his presentation. So Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I just want to move on with a couple slides. I want to make sure I can share the screen okay. And you all see one screen, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Great.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all well, and I hope that you're all safe. And tonight's topic is non-towered airport traffic pattern safety. Now, I've spoken with a couple of pilots out of Lincoln, and it's about time that we do a little refresher course on operating in the non-towered traffic patterns. However, this presentation is geared to Lincoln Airport, but you know what? It will work predominantly at most non-towered airports. So first of all, I want to welcome you all here this evening, and I hope that you find this presentation worthwhile and informative, and that we can reinforce safety principles, proper procedures, and professionalism. And I can't overemphasize the word professionalism when we operate airplanes, especially at non-towered airports. Once again, my name is Paul Koscheka. I'm the FAST Team Program Manager with the Sacramento FSDO. And I also see our Oakland FAST Team Manager, Kevin Sullivan. Looks like he's in the audience as well. And thank you all for being here this evening. So this is a typical FAA slide. It's kind of mandatory that we put this little welcome slide on here. And I want to thank Dan Mays, Jim Hughes, as well as the Lincoln EAA chapter for inviting me to be here with you this evening. Now, we're not going to go through much of the logistics, such as location of restrooms, because we're all teleworking or working from home. However, unfortunately, much of California has returned to the COVID purple tier. The state's more restrictive level has all of us, including FAA, adhering to social distancing and therefore presenting all seminars via multimedia platforms such as Zoom. Personally, I would prefer to be here in person, and maybe probably in the fall we'll be able to do something of that venue. The overview for tonight's topics are listed here. So we're going to briefly discuss collision avoidance, traffic pattern procedures, right-of-way rules, communications, non-standard flight operations, courtesy and safety tips, and a summary followed by responding to any questions, comments, or concerns that any of you may have. Real quick, I got listed in here, there should be right-of-way rules, FARs. Anytime you're operating airplanes, especially when you're talking to FAA, we're going to bring up some FARs. So keep in mind, regulations and procedures cannot cover every conceivable situation. The FAA has wisely avoided imposing rigid operating regulations at non-towered airports. What is appropriate at one airport may not work at the next airfield. So, of course, in our review, we're going to talk about regulatory requirements and proper traffic pattern techniques as referenced in the Aeronautical Information Manual, Advisory Circular AC 90-66B, and also I went through AOPA's Safety Advisory Operations at Non-Towered Airports, which I found to be a wealth of knowledge. But before we continue, we're going to just show a short clip. It's about a minute long. Let's watch this quick video of a Cessna 172. It appears that he's making a base to final approach. So let's go ahead and watch this. And some of you may have seen it. If not, it's pretty scary. okay, that's pretty much it. There's no reason to, continue with that. But I'll tell you what, for me, folks, that's a little too close for comfort. Unfortunately, as an aviator, I've seen that actually happen before. It's a classic high wing, low wing aircraft, both inbound to the same runway. This is the reason why FAA has established traffic pattern rules at non-towered airports and towered airports alike for this one reason. So we're going to start with collision avoidance because right-of-way rules and non-towered airport traffic patterns and procedures exist to prevent collisions both in the air and on the ground. The bottom line, such procedures are established to promote safety amongst all of us. This picture right here, I was pre-flighting my airplane, which was, was probably parked over here right behind this, I can't tell if it's a 172. And an airplane smashed into, these were 4 brand new airplanes, a 182, 2 172s, and a 152, and all 4 airplanes were destroyed from a landing airplane. And I was like right there doing a pre-flight when I saw that, which we're going to discuss a little bit. So just as we saw in the short film earlier, we need to pay particular attention turning toward the final approach course, as this is the leading danger point. Also, maintain vigilance for incoming IFR airplanes, sailplanes, and helicopter operations. And remember, most mid-air collisions occur in clear weather within 5 miles of an airport and below 3,000 feet. I'll talk a little bit about this, but this is the danger point, base to final. And it's for other reasons as well. So we're going to go ahead and review traffic patterns. I understand this is a good review. It was actually a good review for me just going through this, but so just bear with it. But safe flight operation begins with knowing the structure of a standard traffic pattern. The standard traffic pattern is comprised of 6 legs to create a logical safe flow at a non-towered airport. Turns are normally made to the left. Now, the AIM recommends entering the traffic pattern along the appropriate downwind leg from a 45-degree angle. The 45-degree angle provides optimum vigilance to see downwind and departing traffic. Segmented circles and other traffic pattern indicators cue pilots as to the direction as well as the wind, etc. So put this in the back of your mind. Are there other ways to determine if the traffic pattern is to the right? And it's not just looking here at the landing runway indicators, but there are other means that a pilot can determine whether that traffic is right or not. So when overflying the airfield to enter the appropriate downwind leg, fly at an altitude that is 500 feet above the traffic pattern. Such an altitude is essential to avoid conflicts with aircraft in the pattern. When well clear of the pattern, approximately 2 miles, descend to the pattern altitude, and then turn to enter 45 degrees to the downwind leg at midfield. Of course, the best course of action is to overfly the airfield and descend while maneuvering to enter the 45-degree leg to the downwind, which is depicted in the second picture. Now remember, most traffic patterns are 1,000 feet. So if you're going to fly over at 500 feet, that'd be 1,500 feet. So be cautious of turbine aircraft because their traffic pattern is at 1,500 feet. So right-of-way rules. 14 CFR 91-113 general, right-of-way rules. When weather conditions permit, regardless of whether an operation is conducted under IFR or VFR, vigilance shall be maintained by each person operating an aircraft so as to see and avoid other aircraft. When a rule of this section gives another aircraft a right-of-way, the pilot shall give way to that aircraft and may not pass over, under, or ahead of it unless well clear. Going back to that video clip that we saw just a couple minutes ago, I don't think that twin-engine airplane saw that Cessna at all. So once again, this slide is representative of the leading danger point, which is right here, base leg to final. This is your leading danger point. This rule basically states the aircraft on final approach to land have the right of way over aircraft, including departing aircraft. And should there be 2 or more aircraft on final approach, the lower aircraft has the right of way. However, you cannot take advantage of that rule to give yourself the right of way. Remember, let's go back. One of the terms I use is let's be professional when we do all this flying. So operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class G airspace. This is the regulatory requirement for operations at non-towered airports. The AIM reinforces this regulation. So basically, general, unless otherwise authorized or required, each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class G airspace must comply with the requirements of this section. Direction of turns. When approaching to land in an airport without an operating control tower in Class G, each pilot of an airplane must make all turns of that airplane to the left unless the airport displays approved light signals or visual markings indicating that the turn should be made to the right. And by the way, paragraph B, direction of turns, for those of you that are flying on instruments, it applies to circling approaches as well. So if you're on an IFR flight and you're circling to that airport and it's left traffic, you must circle to the left. And there are quite a few case laws showing pilot deviations circling otherwise. One thing, when you're on instruments, there's always a visual segment to an instrument flying, and if you're doing a circling approach, that's your visual segment. Now, pilots flying within Class Echo airspace must also comply with CFR 91-126, the same as the previous slide, unless otherwise required by Part 93 of this chapter. Part 93 is special air traffic rules. That applies to airports like, there's an airport outside Portland, I can't recall the name of it. There's Anchorage and a couple others where you must apply Part 93 rules. But anyway, unless otherwise required by Part 93 of this chapter, or unless otherwise authorized or required by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over Class E airspace, each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of Class E must comply with the requirements of 91-126, which was the previous slide. So, where's Lincoln Airport? Pilots flying within Class Echo airspace must also comply with 91-126, the same as the previous slide, like I said. But Lincoln is in Class E airspace and Class G airspace. Class E overlays Lincoln Regional with a base at 700 feet AGL as depicted by the magenta shading. So here's Lincoln Airport, and this magenta shading indicates that this Class Echo airspace at 700 feet. Now, Class G airspace overlays Lincoln Regional from the surface extending to the base of the underlying Class E airspace. So the Class G starts from the surface, raising up to 700 feet. So that's the magenta. And then right here, real quick, you have a TFR for Mather. This is not a TFR form. Real quick, though, I'm going to tell you, as long as you're talking to NorCal Tracon, you can fly through that. That's not an issue. It's the same as Disneyland TFR. But this is what I'm really concerned with. Does anyone know what this black ring is around Lincoln? Disregard. I actually put that there so that I could find Lincoln Airport a little easier when I presented the slide. So all departures, whether VFR or IFR, must comply with any traffic patterns established for that airport. When departing a non-towered airport, monitor and communicate on the CTAF from engine start until you are 10 miles from the airport. So you will be aware of other traffic that could conflict with your route. The exception is if you need to switch frequencies after departure to talk with air traffic control. Airplanes on takeoff executing a go-around maneuver, etc., should fly straight ahead until beyond the departure end of the runway, with the pilot maintaining awareness of other traffic so as to not conflict with those established in the pattern. And that's established in AC 90-66B. So pretty much what that says is if you're departing VFR, IFR, it really doesn't matter. You may not start your turn until you have at least at a minimum crossed the departure end of the runway. And I remember this many years ago when I was working on my private pilot certificate. I remember the instructor was teaching me go-arounds, and of course I was at the top of my game. I gave all the power in there and started that left turn, and man, he almost broke my arm for doing that. He said, no, you don't start any turn until you cross that departure into the runway. So listening to a busy CTAF for only a few minutes will reveal too many long-winded conversational lists. Don't use this vital collision avoidance resource for non-pertinent communications such as scheduling lunch. I've heard so much stuff on the CTAF that's kind of really should not be there. Hey, if you want to do lunch, land the airplane and go meet your friends and talk about lunch after while you're putting fuel in the airplane. So CTAF needs to be used for two purposes: collision avoidance, airport advisory, safety essential information. Now, due to a tremendous performance differential between experimental aircraft, use the type aircraft such as Lancer. In other words, don't use experimental. AOPA Air Safety Foundation also recommends non-radio aircraft to use a handheld receiver, and the ASF recommends that all traffic pattern announcements include aircraft type. Do not use experimental. The reason why is there's so many different experimental airplanes. Some are fast, some are slow. If you use Lancer, then another pilot in the pattern say, oh, I know a Lancer, that's a pretty high performance airplane. I'm going to follow him rather than, put him behind me. And this is a pet peeve of FAA, and it's also in the Aeronautical Information Manual. Don't use traffic in the area, please advise. Don't be one of them. The phrase is redundant. It contributes to frequency congestion. In fact, according to AIM, it is not a recognized self-announced position and or intention phrase and should not be used under any circumstance. So communication, so be brief. It's important for pilots to know what kind of airplane you are flying than to know your complete call sign. Use your full call sign, however, when you hear another aircraft with a similar call sign. And that's also in the air traffic manual as well. And use the correct airport name at the beginning and the end of each self-announced transmission. Now for the AWOS and ASOS at a non-towered airport, monitor these systems before takeoff and 20 to 30 miles out when approaching to land. You don't want to be listening to an AWOS or an ASOS as you're turning downwind, because I tell you what, folks, you already know it. You're already pretty busy just flying the airplane, looking out that window. So there's non-standard flight operations. I've seen this at Lincoln too. And they can include gliders, balloons. Both may be unable to fly a standard traffic pattern. And remember, these type of operations have the right of way over powered aircraft. Sport parachutists may maneuver to a downwind base and frontal approach legs, but they certainly do not bear much resemblance to a fixed wing traffic pattern. Operators wishing to execute a straight-in approach must use caution so as to not disrupt the normal flow of traffic. In other words, if it's a busy day at Lincoln, really, you really shouldn't be doing a straight-in approach, because there's a chance that you will disrupt the normal flow of traffic, which is pretty much a no-no. So courtesy and safety tips. Look, know before you go. Fly defensively. Don't fly an airplane like, I hate to say it, like we drive cars. Fly the appropriate pattern, use a CTAF, and use landing lights. Jim Hughes said he's got these nice new lights. Use those things. So in summary, always operate in the safest manner possible. Look, know before you go, review traffic patterns, communicate intentions on CTAF, and use those landing lights even during daylight hours. I was an air traffic controller, and I'll tell you what, when you in Arizona, when you would see airplanes on a 5-mile final with landing lights, they were actually readily visible. If the landing lights were not on, it was pretty tough to see those aircraft. So as we continue with some more safety tips, yield the right of way, be courteous, and practice sterile cockpit procedures when in the vicinity of an airport, and be aware. Sterile cockpits, when you're carrying passengers, please tell them that, you know what, we're entering a traffic pattern. Please keep any non-pertinent communication to to when we land the airplane. If they see traffic, yeah, you want them to bring that to your attention. And also, consider that we're not in cars. So be courteous and yield the right of way. Practice sterile cockpit procedures and include avoiding unnecessary chit-chat with passengers. So in a summary, we have react. Eyes is priority number 1. Look for other traffic when in the vicinity of a non-towered airport. And again, use those landing lights. The Air Safety Foundation does not recommend the practice of taking position on the runway and holding at non-towered airports. And by the way, towered airports typically do not do that unless they have the staffing to accommodate that. But we're kind of getting away from, if you will, I'm going to use the term line up and wait. Make pattern announcements just before turning the corners. Banking airplanes are much easier to see. And please do not forget clearing turns. That's what our instructors pounded into our heads years ago. And again, use landing lights within 10 miles of the airport. Make it part of your checklist. By the way, what you see here, that's my traffic pattern. That's what I typically fly. As we go on to a summary for React, we have announced, report your position and intentions using standard phraseology as per the Airman's Information Manual and Advisory Circular 90-66B. If you don't have AC 90-66B, you can Google it and look it up. I tell you what, a lot of great information in there. So again, announce using standard phraseology. All aircraft should monitor CTAF. Air Safety Foundation from a previous slide recommends carrying a handheld transceiver if you do not have a radio in your airplane. And remember, avoid non-pertinent communication. That can wait until you're safely on the ground. And have an airport diagram readily available and be familiar with where to expect inbound IFR aircraft. Be professional. This diagram, I tell you what, a lot of commercial operators are required to have an airport diagram in front of them, no matter how familiar they are with the airfield, but they have to have it in front of them when they're taxiing. Even just get in a habit of having one out all the time, whether you're VFR or IFR. And in React, we have courtesy. A little courtesy will smooth out problems. The me first attitude is not only rude, but it can be dangerous. But I want to go back. By the way, this picture here is Beale Air Force Base. Just, I think it's about 7 or 8 miles north of the Lincoln Airport.
Oh, that's Lincoln.
Is that Lincoln? Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. That's Lincoln.
That's home.
Yeah, it's Lincoln Regional Air Force Base.
Lincoln Regional Airport.
I think the Air Force Base has the same runway configurations, 3315. I can't recall.
Yes, they are, and it looks identical if you're coming from the south because it's twice as wide and twice as long.
I'm clean.
Except for all those Global Hawks and Dragon Ladies on the ramp.
Yes. Yes.
T-38s.
So, in React traffic pattern, follow recommended regulations and procedures prior to flight. Prior to flight, familiarize yourself with departure and destination airports. And by the way, in this airport facility directory, it'll tell you if the airport has right traffic pattern as well. So I'll tell you what, that's pretty much the presentation. I wanna field some questions here in just a minute, but I gotta go over this wings real quick because the Wings Pilot Proficiency Program is general aviation standard operating procedure. We don't have, in general aviation, there's such a varied pilot certificates, student pilots, recreational pilots, commercial pilots, and so forth, and such a large variety of airplanes. It's so difficult to develop a standard operating procedure. And I really think Wings Pilot Proficiency Program is one way for the FAA to try and gear people towards some kind of standard operating procedure. Wings Pilot Proficiency is a peace of mind. There's nothing like the feeling you get when you know you're playing your A game, and in order to do that, you need good coaching. So fly regularly with a CFI who will challenge you to review what you know, explore new horizons, and to always do your best. Of course, you'll have to dedicate time and money to your proficiency program, but it's well worth it with a peace of mind that comes with confidence. A famous violinist, Jascha Heifetz, said, "If I don't practice for a day, I know it. If I don't practice for 2 days, the critics know it. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the public knows it." For pilots, that means practice with precision, on course, on attitude, and on speed all the time. By the way, real quick, the Wings Pilot Proficiency Program is, you can attend 3 seminars or take some FAAsafety.gov courses, a total of 3, and then 3 flight credits within a 12-month period, and that automatically renews your flight review. You don't have to do another flight review. Flight instructor doesn't have to sign you off or anything, but the beautiful thing is the flight instructor gets their CFI renewed automatically too through this program. So that's pretty much all I had on non-tower airport operations. And at this time, I can go ahead and take any kind of questions or comments that anyone may have.
So Paul, maybe I can start. This is not a common thing, but you know, I fly an RV that climbs at in excess of 2,000 feet per minute, and it can actually, and usually does when I'm the only occupant, reach pattern altitude before it gets to the end of the runway. And it has always seemed to me that if you have an airplane that is at pattern altitude, that waiting to the end sort of puts you in this position of converging lower performance traffic that is climbing more slowly on this same route where you're already at pattern altitude. So they sort of come up underneath you. And I never saw it written down, but it always seemed to me that made the safer route to just initiate a turn early to get out of their way.
Okay, Dan, what you have to do is you have to use common sense that fits the scenario that you're in. Typically, you would fly to the departure end of the runway. However, if it's a safe maneuver for you to go ahead and start your turn to the downwind without conflicting with other traffic, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. It's not a regulatory requirement. However, it's in FAA guidance as well as AOPA guidance to fly to the departure end of the runway. And you're gonna have to use common sense to fit that situation that you're in at that time.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hey, this is Mike. Quick question for you. I noticed one of the things that you mentioned is when describing your aircraft type, don't use the word experimental. I'm really out of date in terms of flying. I haven't flown in many years, but my memory is telling me that it used to be the case that you were supposed to say experimental. So it was like, if you were in a certified aircraft, use your make and type. But in experimental, they just like lumped them all together, experimental. Is my memory wrong from back then, or did it change?
No, your memory is accurate. what happened, and this is, and I've researched this through ALPA, and what their consensus is now is that back in the day, experimental airplanes, they just grouped them all together. And they were all relatively, if you will, pretty much the same performing type aircraft. But today, an experimental airplane can do a lot more. And I'm going to use the Lancer because that's the only experimental airplane I know that's pretty fast. That's typically, I'm going to say that's probably faster than a Bonanza fast.
Mike, to add a little bit to that, I fly a Cardinal that I've flown for about 18 years, and 4 years ago I bought an RV6. So I also said experimental 106 Echo Juliet, and 99% of the time the controllers would say, what type of experimental? So I started saying RV 106 Echo Juliet, never had a problem with air traffic control. They want to know what I'm flying.
Yeah, very good. This is actually super useful because you know, I'm not at all current, but you know, I hope to be here in, you know, probably a year and a half or so, and so this is very timely information. I appreciate it. Thank you.
There's also us, I guess, old timers for whom you can we would do both. You just say, when you're on an IFR flight plan and you get handed off to a center or something, you just say experimental RV and give your number. That way you've covered the old bases and the new bases.
You could do that. You could do that. Yes. Yes. So, anyone else?
So Paul, what do we do when we see a risky or / illegal maneuver? I mean, we have aircraft that will make a midfield turn at 200 feet and fly over us and over the gazebo where there's 20 of us, you know, and the guy that flies a 200-foot, 300-foot pattern and usually cuts it really tight, like his downwind is over the taxiway.
Okay, so my first plan of course of action would be to resolve everything at the lowest level possible. Now, I would go ahead and contact your FAST team rep at the airfield, and if it's a local airport, when he finally lands, talk to him and tell him how dangerous that could be. If there's no resolution from there, then the next course of action would be actually to call the Sacramento FSDO or the local FSDO. And the FSDO has a number of ways they can communicate with an airman, and typically the first thing they would do is counsel the airman, saying, "Hey, really, that's not appropriate for what's going on." But really, this kind of goes back to what Dan says. But really, if the traffic pattern is really busy, you really got to go to the departure end. Personally, I would go to the departure end before I make any turn, whether it's busy or not, just to develop my own standard operating procedures. Does that help you, Jim?
Yeah, it does. I know a couple of the people that are doing those kind of things, and they're very, very unreceptive of any criticism. They'll just keep doing it.
And which is unfortunate. And if it really becomes a nuisance, then the next course of action would be to call the FSDO, and flight standards we would counsel the airman. And if we did not get an adequate response, then there's other issues that can be dealt with.
And I don't think, you know, one of the things that, you know, we're in a pilot controlled airspace. I know, you know, the term uncontrolled is not the right term. So as fellow pilots, all that fly around Lincoln on a regular basis, if we know particular individuals that are commonly causing safety issues, we should have an intervention as pilots. You know, address it with them directly and just let them know respectfully that, you know, this behavior is causing an issue. Here are the rules, and the reason we fly these rules is so that we can all stay safe. We'd appreciate it if you could follow them. And then if that doesn't work, then we, you know, go to FSDO type resources to help us. But, you know, when appropriate, we should try to have a polite confrontation in order to let someone know that, there's something that's a safety issue.
Yeah, Chris,
Right.
that's all well and good, Chris, and I appreciate your comments. But those of us that are based at Lincoln know, like Jim, know specifically the 2 or 3 offenders that do this about 90% of the time. Do a takeoff, they've got their buddies down below. 4 weeks ago, one of them took off, flew over the gazebo, and then went out and buzzed his neighborhood. I couldn't see him below the buildings. Saturday, we had somebody at display day from city council overtaken an airport tour, and somebody took off and immediately turned over the gazebo at about 200 feet. And the newly elected city council member that wanted a tour of the airport said, "What's this guy doing?" We've talked to these guys. The reception varies from rude to "you're wasting my time" to worse. They don't want to hear it. They will tell us there are no rules. This is a non-towered airport. My response is, yeah, this is an out of control airport. They don't want to hear it. They want to do their own thing. You probably heard the story months ago of the fellow landing on the taxiway against traffic. I talked to the instructor after that, and he was bordering on belligerent that he was the ace of the base. He was a great instructor. The people that are offending will not listen because they're smarter than everybody else. It's a really difficult situation.
And you won't see him at any of these seminars or these meetings.
No, they'll never show up here. They're above us.
And I was gonna suggest that you invite them to some of these. And by the way, this information is in the Aeronautical Information Manual. So it is, okay, I'm not sure exactly how to say this nicely, but it's quasi-regulatory if it's in the Aeronautical Information Manual. I've read quite a few legal briefs on pilot deviations, more than I care to read. And this is all administrative law. And if there's a regulation that's not in writing, what is in writing becomes quasi-regulatory to a judge. So you can let them know that. But like Scott was mentioned, the best, yeah, if you can get them to attend a seminar like this, these do change people's habits. But, and then I think it was Bruce, I really would get your fast team rep on board rather than, or I'm sorry, Chris, rather than you confronting an airman, because a lot of people don't like confrontation. They're not confrontational. Where the fast team rep has got a little bit of clout with the FAA.
Yeah, I guess that would be me then, huh, Paul?
That would be you, Jim. And
Yeah.
by the way, is with the buzzing, I think Chris mentioned that someone was buzzing. I'll tell you what, the FAA doesn't take that lightly. I've been with FSDO for about a year and a half, maybe a couple of years now, and we've already had, I believe, 3 buzzing issues. And those, I hate to say it, but those typically end up in some type of enforcement action, which you really don't want.
Yeah. Yeah. The
So
other
hey,
thing
real quick.
One more thing,
Go ahead.
Paul. Yeah, what I'm seeing now, as Dan mentioned, we're having a lot of instructional flights, and what I'm seeing a lot of is there'll be 2 or 3 airplanes, waiting to take off and holding short, and an instructional aircraft will take the runway, and they'll sit there for like 2 minutes. I don't know what they're doing. I guess maybe the instructor is telling this guy, how he's going to take off, but he's literally, taking up 2 minutes of time sitting on the approach end of the runway, and there's already traffic in the pattern. It gets to be, it makes me nervous to see these guys just sitting on the runway.
Yes, Jim. And I think a couple slides toward the beginning of the presentation, there was something to that effect. Don't sit on the runway like that. And that's something where we're going to need to teach these instructors. If you have something to tell your student, tell him before you take that active runway.
Yeah.
Get that all clarified. So when you turn on that runway, you're going to go. Anyone else have anything they want to bring up?
I'll just make my standard comment when we're talking traffic patterns, and that is, please don't just use geographical locations around the airport when you're calling in, because I fly at a lot of airports, and I'm not familiar where Stone Lake is or where Grandma Stevens' house is. You gotta use distance and direction from the airport, or else anybody not familiar is not gonna have any idea where you're calling from.
Exactly, and that's a good point, Scott. Thank you. But at the same time, if you're coming in on VOR approach, if you sit there and you go, hey, this is Cessna 123, I'm on the VOR runway 33 approach. What that tells, that pretty much gives no information. So you want to be specific. Hey, Cessna 123, 3 mile final. Who cares if you're on a VOR approach?
Absolutely. You gotta give distance.
But yeah, you bring up. Yes, exactly. You bring up a good point. So, and with more questions, the one thing I want you to know is, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Don't be this guy, okay? By the way, here's the runway right here. He's not even on alignment for the runway. Go figure.
Yeah, Paul, I from time to time fly down to Camarillo, down on the south coast. And if you're coming from the north, they'll want you to report over the girls' school or the Satakoy Bridge. Thank God I've lived in that area, so I know where those are. But it's like if someone was coming from somewhere else, they wouldn't know a Satakoy Bridge from the girls' school.
Are they VFR checkpoints on the sectional chart? I don't know.
I don't think so.
No.
The Satakoy Bridge. The Satakoy Bridge is a VFR checkpoint on the.
Is it?
sector.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. And they're assuming everybody there in Camarillo is familiar with that airport,
Yeah.
and that's a pretty busy airport.
It is. It's very busy. Yeah.
Hey, so real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say real quick before we continue with any questions that someone may have, if anyone has a question or a comment they want to bring up, you can contact me at my email, paulkoscheka@faa.gov, and I'll get back to you. And like I said, I would much prefer to meet all of you in person, but like the COVID, we're not doing that right now. The FAA is not, they're not allowing anyone out of our house. At least all the FSDOs are all on working from home now.
Hey, Paul, I saw a note. I think you passed it on to folks. With the COVID restrictions, some towers wind up being abandoned because of COVID infections, and the airport becomes uncontrolled at that point.
Yes. What happened was Orange County Airport, and I haven't looked at the NOTAM recently, but it was closing at 6 p.m. They didn't have the staffing. I was just at NorCal TRACON a couple of days ago, and they're pretty short-staffed. What they're trying to do is keep the same crew on, and that same crew works together so that they can't spread COVID. If someone had COVID from that crew, it won't go on to other people. So they're pretty well short-staffed. There's a lot of airports for you that are going to be going to get instrument training that air traffic's going to say unable. Because of the short staff in air traffic personnel. But like I said, I do know Orange County was closing at 6 p.m. I don't know if it still is or not. And even the air carriers were using it as an uncontrolled, as a non-towered airport.
Wow.
So,
this was a great program to kick off the new year, Paul. Thank you so much. We're coming right up on the hour, so we'll be punctual on both ends of both the start and the end. And it's great that Paul ends with this slide with his email address. So those who want to carry on the conversation or have questions that are kind of not for a public forum, please contact Paul directly. Our next event will be our IMC Club. That'll be Wednesday, February 3rd. And as long as Scott Thompson's available and his cat, then we're guaranteed, along with our "What would you do" scenario, to have another good and interesting educational event then. So with that, I'll thank you all for participating, and I'm going to go ahead, if there aren't any other questions or comments, and end our monthly thing.
May I bring up one more item?
Yes.
On February 2nd, we're doing a seminar on wrong runway landing events. Apparently that's become one of the hot topics for FAA, and you may want to look for that one.
If you send us the link for that, Paul, we'll send it out to our chapter mailing list.
Yeah, you know what? I've already sent it out to Sacramento, Oakland. Anyone in the Sacramento, Oakland, Fresno, and San Jose FSDO districts, you should have received something probably today, a go-to webinar. But this is not, it's not just general aviation, folks. It's a lot of commercial operators are making landings where they should not be. So you may be interested in that.
So Paul, can I find that up on the SPAN's? Can I find that up on the FAA safety site?
Yeah. Well, yes, it's on SPANS, but it's under webinars.
Webinars,
You know,
okay.
So look under webinars. It's under
Yeah,
webinars.
I'll look it up and send it to Dan.
Okay. Hey,
Great.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, everybody. I appreciate your time, and I hope you got something out of this. And, and stay safe out there.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks again, Paul. Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night.